Some buyers of timber have different specifications. Some cut to a 12-inch top, some cut to a 14-inch top. I remember several years ago, a guy told me, he said, well, my neighbor got so much more than I did for his same timber, then why? I said, well, what was the specification? If he cut his to a 14-inch top and yours to a 12-inch top, you got more money because you cut more tons. He left more tons in the wood. Something as simple as specifications should be in the contract.
Welcome to Forest Matters, a podcast about sustainable forest management, forest carbon development, and the opportunities available to landowners through global carbon markets. Forest Matters is brought to you by NativState, the leading forest carbon development company for small private landowners. Welcome back to another episode of the Forest Matters podcast. In the series of episodes that we've done so far, we've been talking about sustainable forestry and sustainable forest management, but today we're going to get into a little bit of that, but we're going to start off with question number one. But first, let me introduce our guest. Once again, we have Tim White, our NativState's Vice President of Forestry. Hi, Tim.
Good to see you, Mark.
And let me start off with question number one that we get from everybody, just to reiterate. Does enrolling in a forest carbon program mean I can no longer harvest any trees on my land?
That's a great question. And in the NativState program, no, you are allowed. And that's for those people that may not be enrolled in a program, that's one of the things you really need to dig into and make sure of whatever carbon program you're in, that you ask that specific question. And with NativState, we do have what's called an allowable harvest over a period of time that you are allowed to harvest some timber.
Right. And so how does enrolling in a forest carbon program, such as NativState's, change the way landowners should think about timber harvesting?
Great. So you can harvest. I tell people this, you're allowed to harvest. It may not be the amount that you traditionally would do, or those trees may have to stay on the landscape longer. We call that a rotation age, specifically around pine. The rotation may be lengthened some. So while you can harvest, you can't probably harvest to the level, you shouldn't be able to harvest to the level of common practice of what everybody does, right, or you shouldn't be in a carbon program. The guiding thought is, when you start with a forest, no matter what size that forest is, let's just pick a forest that's got 100 tons of wood per acre. At the end of the carbon agreement, you need to have at least 100 tons or more. So that forest is going to grow. You can cut that growth. You can cut a portion of that growth through the 20 or 40 years, and that's perfectly okay. I think there's a misconception that people think when you enroll in a carbon program that you're locking those trees up forever and you can never, ever, ever cut them. That's not healthy for the forest, so we would not want to do that. And so, yes, you can absolutely cut to an allowable harvest.
All right. So when it gets into the practice of cutting and what you're going to do in that sustainable harvest, let's get into the ever fun topic of contracts.
Okay.
And first and foremost, let's be clear, this is not legal advice.
No.
Neither Tim nor I are lawyers.
No.
So you should involve your attorney in when you develop contracts. But Tim's been working on this a long time, so you have some idea about how this works.
So these are some items that you need to make sure are in your contract, among other things. Timber, and we're talking about timber harvest contracts. Right. And I'll try not to get too far in the weeds because this could be a long conversation. So when you're selling timber, there's two basic ways to sell timber. You can sell it as a lump sum, a group. In other words, I'll give you X amount of dollars for your timber. Doesn't matter how many tons, doesn't matter what species, whatever. That's called lump sum. Another way to sell timber is we call pay as cut. I want to specify those trees to be cut, and I'm going to pay you by the ton, in some cases board feet. Not many people use board feet. I'm going to pay you per ton for what is cut. So those lump sum and pay as cut are the two methods, but each of those methods should have a contract associated with it. And things in that contract, something as simple as specifications. What size trees are you cutting? Now, typically, the trees would be identified in some manner. There's a boundary painted around them or a flagged around them, or their trees are individually painted, or you identify them in some way, by a residual basal area, cut down to a certain basal area, or some way to identify those trees to be cut. But in some mills, some buyers of timber have different specifications. Some cut to a 12-inch top, some cut to a 14-inch top. I remember several years ago, a guy told me, he said, well, my neighbor got so much more than I did for his same timber, then why? I said, well, what was the specification? If he cut his to a 14-inch top and yours to a 12-inch top, you got more money because you cut more tons. He left more tons in the wood. Something as simple as specifications should be in the contract. Who is responsible for payment terms? Is there a down payment involved? Are there road deposits that you need to have so you get done with the job and there's ruts in the road? Who's going to fix that? Okay, things like protecting boundaries, corners, not falling trees outside or on fences. Obviously, road work and stuff is important, but a big part of it is the state best management practices for water quality, or as we call them, BMPs. Who's responsible for that? Who's going to mark, if there is an SMZ, a streamside management zone, who's responsible for marking that, and how is it delineated? Is it a painted line? Is it a flag line? And what if any harvesting activities can go on inside that SMZ has to be spelled out of the contract. There's there's a length of contract. Timber markets change. Timber markets are local and they fluctuate some within each locality. South Arkansas is different than North Arkansas is different than North Louisiana. But you can only, you can't expect to just say this is open-ended, cut it till you get done. Well, what if prices go up? Right. And what if they take 2 years to cut it? So you need to specify the length of the contract. Those are a few of the things. I'm trying to think of some other really key parts. Are
there safeguards in terms of insurance and road to access?
Absolutely. Contractor, the insurance requirements are in there. The buyer should grant the seller access to the property, and they should guarantee to the seller they have free and clear title to that timber. So who knew they had a lien on it, or who knew they had an old timber deed or something like that? So they have to make sure that they have good, clear title to the timber. They're able to sell it. It's clearly delineated as what is cut and when it should be cut. And if damage occurs to the trees that are left, what happens? Pine trees, not such a big deal. Hardwood trees, it's a big deal. If you skin up the side of a hardwood tree and it's not one, let's say, that was supposed to come out and wasn't marked to be cut, well, you've just introduced rot into that tree. And so the next harvest, the bottom 6 feet of that tree won't be any good, let's say. So there's maybe some damage clauses, penalties in there. If weather changes during the harvest activity, when can you say, okay, y'all stop because you're making too big of ruts? That has to be spelled out in the contract. And let's say the contract expires and they don't get finished. Are there a provision in there to grant them an extension? And if so, what's the price? Does the price extend? I've had to do that a few times because, in bottomland hardwood especially, it may take 2 years to cut a tract because it just gets, there's only a limited amount of time to do harvesting. So there's a lot of that needs to be in a contract.
Well, in introducing the layer of land that may be enrolled in a forest carbon program at the same time, what does that bring to bear in terms of contracting and making sure your harvest contract is sound? Well,
especially if that land is in a forest certification program, like we've mentioned before on previous episodes, FSC, SFI, something as simple as contractor must follow all laws and regulations. Well, that covers OSHA laws, which is safety. That covers regulations about spills. Let's say they have a hydraulic line break and it spills a certain amount of hydraulic. Who's cleaning that up? And what laws or regulations do you have to follow to make sure that happens? So that's a key part. And it's more not just because it's in a carbon program, but because it's in a certification program. Something as simple as road building. You got to get from the highway or the county road to the track. Well, who's going to build the road and how is it to be built? It should be built to follow the BMPs. Okay, it should be built in such a way to be able to withstand truck traffic and all the things that go on with harvesting. So There's a lot. I mean, most timber sale contracts are usually 3 to 4 pages long. They're pretty lengthy.
Well, and how does your team get involved in those with landowners who enrolled in our program as they come on?
For the NativState landowners, if they are in, which they will be, in some type of certification, I brought a sample. Here we go of our sample harvesting contract, and I think this is 4 pages. We will provide to them a sample. I mean, here again, we're not attorneys and we're not representing ourselves as legal authorities, but this should cover all the guidelines in that certification program, okay? And for that landowner is free to use it. Obviously, run it by their attorney would be a good idea, but we'll have that available to them. And this is a harvesting contract. We have chemical application contracts. We have, whether it's land or aerial application of herbicides, we'll have a contract for that. Something as simply as a boundary line. People paint boundary lines. Well, you need a contract for that. Right. Why? Well, what if they make a mistake and they mark something that's not your boundary? Who's responsible? Real important. Another thing I think I didn't point out is obviously in the contract, you obviously have to have the price, and the price per ton, or as I said, lump sum, and is that money to be paid half up front, entirely up front? The terms, how is it to be paid? And how do you keep up with that? Like, for example, pay as cut, as I mentioned, every truckload will have a scale ticket. This is how many tons went across the scale. You should get a copy of that. And you should be able to balance that. Okay, I've got 42 tickets totaling so many tons, so much of pulpwood, so much of saw timber, so much of pallet wood, or whatever it is, and that should absolutely reconcile with the money they pay you.
Well, and I think it's important to keep in mind that those tickets are a part of our documentation process.
Yes.
When we sell credits, and back to our corporate buyers to be accountable to them.
Yes. So we take the timber removed, that timber gets placed in what's called permanent wood products. So, obviously it was turned into paper or lumber or cross ties or something. So those actually permanent wood products stay on the landscape for, I think we're allowed to keep 100 years. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure we get to count those for 100 years. I mean, the wood in a building stays for quite a long time. Well, it gets moved from standing timber to permanent wood products. So we have to account for that.
Right.
Okay. In addition, we have to account on our carbon inventory for those tons that are removed. So we actually have to go do some re-inventory and that type of stuff, because you had 100 tons and you cut 20. Well, now you've got 80, and then that 80 is going to grow. So we have to keep up with that.
Right. And just to be clear, I mean, it's our job as a forest carbon developer to guide landowners through that entire process.
Yes, correct? It is. Yes, it is. And a couple of my foresters have actually been procurement foresters. They bought timber before, so they are very, very well versed in contracts and what should and shouldn't be in there.
Well, just to kind of wrap up, if you could give landowners just 1 or 2 quick things to remember when they enter into this process, and especially when they consider timber harvesting while in a carbon program, what would you want to make sure that they know? The
first thing is get in touch with us. Tell us about what your plans are. Because we've got an inventory, we know we've got a pretty good idea, but from the inventory, what's there. I had a landowner last Friday, big tract, 5,000 acres, White County. Hey, I'm thinking about cutting some timber. I was like, well, okay, let me remind you, in your carbon agreement, this and this and this applies, and we'd love to talk to you. He was wanting to sell some white oak, which is fairly valuable. I said, okay, here's my suggestion. First of all, I'm going to go look at it. Me and one of my other guys are going to go look at it, but right now it's probably not a good time. And I told him a lot of reasons why. We also keep up with timber markets, right? Because, like I said, they're local. And what's going on up here in North Arkansas may not be going on in South Arkansas. So we try to keep up with that. And if there's an opportune time to sell, absolutely, that's great for the landowner. But we're there to supply as much technical expertise as we can.
All right. And just one last reminder, remember, we're not attorneys.
Run the disclaimer at the bottom.
But it is important to consult with your foresters and to consult with NativState when you get into this.
And an attorney that's familiar with this.
Right.
Because they are not all. Just like foresters, we specialize in one thing, so do attorneys. But there's some good ones out there that understand contract law, and they could handle.
Well,
snow
and where
problem.
we operate, in the timber basket of America, so there's plenty of resources available.
We want to throw as much business as we can to those poor attorneys. That's right.
All right, Tim, thanks for your time.
You bet, Mark. Thank you.
Forest Matters is brought to you by NativState, the leading forest carbon development company for small private landowners. Learn more at nativestate.com.